everybody. And Ms. Hess, thank you for setting up as usual. I appreciate that. So we always get started with a prayer. So I want to ask you all to please join me as we do the Pledge of Allegiance and beginning our roundtable discussion. And y'all see, I have my own flag today. Isn't that wonderful? So I'm going to stand right over here. If you'll join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. So I'm Anna Johnson. For those of you who may not know, it's always a pleasure to come to the round table and share information with my constituents and anyone that wants to participate. Today, we are fortunate to have Mr. Evans and his staff to lead us in the historic preservation information that's going to be presented today. And I guess all of you must love history. That's why you're here today. So just want to say a few tidbits about trying to get your history documented and why it's important, why I think it's important. I just feel that there's so much we can learn from history preserving things, the sites, even our family history. I see somebody on from the library and they have lots of tools that can help you with your family history if you so desire to do that. But documenting buildings and cemeteries, two things that I've been working a little bit on, learning more about.
The roundtable just came on, and I'm trying to. I just signed in, so.
And I think we're hearing someone is trying to sign in. So hopefully everybody gets connected with us, and you learn a lot about what our planning department is doing with the historic preservation. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Evans, Joel Evans, who is the director for our planning department, and let him share the information for today. Mr. Evans?
Okay. Yes, thank you.
We need Kristen though. Hey, Kristen, can you allow us to share our screen?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, you should be able to now.
All right. We'll go ahead and get started.
Okay.
As Councilmember Johnson said, I'm Joel Evans. I'm the planning director for the county. Also here with me to my right is Andrea Melisic. She's the deputy director, and to my left is Nikki Grimble. And so the way we'll do this presentation, it's not real long. It'll be somewhat informal, but I will start it off, and I'm planning on maybe Nikki and I kind of going through and filling in the blanks as we go through it if people have questions. But just a little bit of history about the Historic Preservation Ordinance. It was adopted in 2018. It created the Historic Preservation Commission, and it creates a method for communities or properties to be designated historic, and it provides a layer of protection for historic properties or districts by requiring review by the Historic Preservation Commission prior to permitting or subdivision. So we'll go through those two processes. The way this Historic Preservation Commission works is like a lot of the other boards and commissions of county council. County council elects they're elected members, of course, but they appoint 9 members to the Historic Preservation Commission. So there are 9 members, just as there are 9 members of council. And the way that usually works is that each council member will nominate someone to be on the commission, and then the council as a whole will codify that, will adopt that. Okay. So what makes something historic? It has to have significant inherent character, interest, history, or value as part of the rural county or heritage of the county, state, or nation. It could be an event of significance in history. It's associated with a person or persons who contributed significantly to the culture and development of the county, state, or nation. It exemplifies the cultural, political, economic, social, ethnic, and historic heritage of the county, and individually or collectively embodies distinguishing characteristics of a type, style, or period in architecture. So when we're talking about historic preservation, especially in Charleston County, it's not always just about the building or the architecture as what most people might think in their minds. You know, living around here, you think about the historic area of downtown Charleston that has the old buildings, and yes, those are significant, but that is basically dealing with the physical architecture of the buildings and the significance it has there. Historic preservation is more than that. Again, going back to the history of this ordinance, the county had a consultant look at Charleston County as a whole to update our own inventory of properties that were on the National Register of Historic Places, and to see if it could be added to. And from that study came a lot of recommendations, and one of them was to create a Historic Preservation Commission. And so that's what was done in 2018 that I showed you in that previous slide. So it's something new to Charleston County, the unincorporated parts of Charleston County, to have a Historic Preservation Commission. As I said, the city has had a architectural review board and historic preservation for years. So we thought it was time for the county as well to follow suit. So we'll go to the next slide. This is continuing on what makes something historic, is the work of a designer whose work has significantly influenced the development of the county. Contains elements of design, detail, and materials or craftsmanship which represent significant innovation. It's part of a related to a square or other distinctive element of community planning. It represents an established and familiar visual feature for the neighborhood or community, and it has yielded or may be likely to yield information important in prehistory or history, and is deemed eligible for already listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So the way that last bullet is important, the way this works with our Historic Preservation Commission with the county is that we do have a list of all the properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places, and that was the starting point of our inventory. And when we passed the ordinance in 2018, that transferred onto the county's list of historic properties. So the Historic Preservation Commission has 2 primary functions. One is to issue certificates of appropriateness for properties that are on this county list, which includes properties that are on the National Register of Historic Places, and also properties within 300 feet. If they're going to develop in any way, they have to get this certificate of appropriateness if they're within 300 feet of something that's on this list, National Register or the Charleston County's list, which is one and the same. The other significant duty of the Historic Preservation Commission is that they recommend to County Council properties that are voluntarily taken to the Historic Preservation Commission for designation. So it does not have to be on the National Register of Historic Places. A property owner or a community can take a property or a community to the Historic Preservation Commission for recommendation to be designated historic, and then ultimately County Council has the final decision-making authority on that. So there's two different functions of the commission. All right. So the designation part, as I said, it's voluntary, and we are working with. We actually, the Historic Preservation Commission has actually approved or recommended one property at their last meeting. It was the Hebron Zion Church on Johns Island, and that will be going to County Council for final approval. But it's a voluntary process, and the property owners can request to have their individual property or group of properties, like a district, added to the local list of historic properties. And again, as I said, that gets approved by County Council. The application must have the written consent of the property owners, and for historic districts, must also have a petition of consent showing at least 51% of the registered voters within the proposed district, saying that they're in favor of this designation. We do have one community or district that's in the process of wanting to become recognized as a historic district, and that is the Phillips community. Right now, off of 41, they have started that process with us, and we expect to see that application and the community come to the Historic Preservation Commission in May to get a recommendation to County Council to become historic at that meeting. So, how the process works is there's a pre-application meeting with staff. There's a Historic Preservation Commission recommendation, as I said, and then County Council will have a public hearing, and then it goes to County Council Planning and Public Works Committee for a recommendation to Council, and then there are 3 readings to make it official. So the effects of the designation, there are pros and cons. We think there's mostly pros, but we want to make sure that everyone is aware of what that means if you do become a historic designation, property of a historic designation. Of course, the main focus, it's primarily to protect the character of the community by requiring public notice and public hearings on a variety of development applications, zoning and building permits, subdivision applications, development, other than single-family residences, et cetera. So what that means is if you are considered designated as historic in Charleston County, any zoning or building permit goes to the Historic Preservation Commission for a certificate of appropriateness, basically for approval. They're going to be looking to make sure that whatever is developed there is in character with the community, if it's a district, and if it's in character with what made it historic, if it's a historic place. There are some other pros. There are tax exemptions, both at the state and federal level, 25% for the state and 20% at the federal level. The historic preservation easements, they can be established to preserve properties in exchange for one-time federal income tax credit and reduce federal state taxes as well, and increased home prices and sustained value. Research from Columbia, Beaufort, and Greenville indicates home value increases range on an average of 21 to 50% if they are considered historic. So the effects, other effects of pros and cons, there is a lengthier and more detailed review. It is another step of approval and permitting when you have to go through this process. We try to make it as fast and as painless as possible, but there is a level of review when it goes through the Historic Preservation Commission that was not there before. But the idea is that we're protecting the character of the historic property or the district by doing this. There are limitations on renovations based on state and local requirements. Sometimes you'll need a skilled craftsman if it's one of these old historic buildings that has significance that may be needed to do the work on these buildings, because there's people that specialize in that. Sometimes the materials that are required to do renovations or additions to some of these historic buildings, the materials may be difficult to locate or expensive. Building codes also require changes to historic structures may jeopardize the federal tax credit. So code compliance can be an issue sometimes. And then insurance. Some personal insurance companies may not offer the type of coverage needed to insure a historic home, meaning the historic property insurance may be required as well. So the certificate of appropriateness, that application requires a process prior to the issuance of the zoning permit. As I said, this is one of the primary functions I talked about earlier of the Historic Preservation Commission, and it's for properties that are designated or properties within 300 feet of a property or district that's designated as historic. So the process is determined if the proposed work or development will negatively affect the historic site or district, and it does require an extra step in permitting, as I said earlier. So the their certificate process, again, that starts with a pre-application meeting with staff. Then the Historic Preservation Commission will make their decision, and they can approve or deny the application. And depending on the vote of approval or denial, an applicant will either be able to move forward with the permitting or subdivision, or may have to alter their plans and reapply and come back to the Historic Preservation Commission. But the idea is that, especially if it's like a district, that the people that live in that district are notified and they know what's going on with the development around them, and that they have a say-so as to what gets built in that area.
I'm going to stop here and ask for questions. Oh, you got it. Yeah.
So we built in a little break before we move on to the next section to see if anybody had any specific questions about the ordinance or the processes.
I got one.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, okay. This is being recorded, right?
Yes.
Where do we find the
Who are
recording?
we talking with?
This is my name's Joshua Infinger.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find out where the recording is as well for after. Is it like it's on a
Kristen,
site? Is it on the site?
Well, no, it's usually on Miss Johnson's site, but we make it into a YouTube link and then Miss Johnson posts it on her website.
Fun. Okay. So you talked about preservation and all that stuff in historic sites. Is Francis Marion a historic site?
Francis Marion Forest?
Park. The little park in the city of Charleston.
That you would have to check with the city of Charleston. So anything that's in this presentation has to do with properties that are in unincorporated Charleston County.
So interesting.
Anything that's incorporated, whether it's Mount Pleasant, the city, or the city of North Charleston, whatever that jurisdiction has for historic preservation and other basic, frankly, any other ordinance requirements, that municipality would have the say-so. So, I mean, if I was to guess, I would think there's some sort of protection there, but I don't know for sure. I don't know if that's considered historic or not.
Anyone else?
I have
Yes.
several questions.
Okay.
I think I heard someone else too. This is Cheryl
Oh,
Cromwell.
go ahead. I'll wait until you're finished.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I have, this is Cheryl Cromwell. I have a couple of questions. The first one has to do with the consent of the property owners. What happens when there are heirs properties? Say you wanted to do a community and you have a lot of heirs
Sure.
property and each of them could
Yeah,
have upwards of 200 people. How's that handled?
yeah, Ms. Cromwell, that's an excellent question. And actually, when we were drafting the ordinance, we thought about that. And that is why, if you look at the language of the requirement of consent, it's not the property owners that's required. It's 51% of the registered voters. So that was purposely written that way, so that properties like heirs properties would not be penalized and having a say-so in whether or not they wanted to be designated historic. That all they had to do was live there with proof of living there, and the best way that we could require proof of living there without ownership was through requiring that it be the registered voters.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe I misunderstood that designation area where it said consent of property owners or 51% of
Oh, okay. So yeah, I can. Sorry, yeah, I understand the confusion there. So, if a single property wants to come and be designated, that only requires that property owner. That
Okay.
51% consent, that is for districts.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have made that distinction a little clearer in the presentation. So there are two ways to get something designated. It can be a single property, which would require the property owner, or it can be a district of any size, which then reverts to the 51% of the registered voters.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, my other question
Yeah.
is about the character. You say that it protects the character of a community. My question is, who determines what that character is? Is it this condition that the community is in at that time, or is there, do the property owners have, or the district or whoever is in it, have any say about what that character of the community should look like? Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yeah, it does. So the idea is that when a district or a property comes in, but I'm talking about districts, if a development is coming into a district that's designated historic, then it would be the community basically through the public process of the Historic Preservation Commission approval, that would be sort of advising both staff and the Historic Preservation Commission of what, if the development meets the character of the community. So that the idea is that the community has some sort of say-so and is aware of the development. And I'm envisioning, for instance, if it's one of these settlement communities that has a specific sort of settlement development pattern, that if a developer came in with a development that was outside of the way of the lot sizes and the house sizes and the way that the community had developed over the years, and if it was done what you would see, with much smaller lots and bigger houses. I think that the Historic Preservation Commission could easily make a recommendation that, hey, that development really is not fitting in the character of that existing historic district settlement community because of the scale of what's being proposed.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to make this my last question, and it's in regards to skilled craftsmen. So if you're in an area like the settlement communities who traditionally have what we consider skilled craftsmen who may not be identified as skilled craftsmen by whoever certifies or whatever someone as a skilled craftsman, what happens in those cases? Or does anyone that work on the properties or build on the properties have to be registered as a skilled craftsman? Can you talk a little bit about what that means? And that's my last question.
No, that would just be somebody that, feels that they have the skills necessary to treat things in a different manner than current, building or construction teams currently use. So if it's, let's say it's a certain type of joining wood together, then a skilled craftsman may be needed to uphold, that distinctive characteristic, but it's not something that you would have to be registered for or, have any kind of education. If somebody knows how to do it, then that's wonderful.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. I think that the skilled craftsman part is going to mostly apply to specific historic buildings that have that are of a certain age and that have a unique way of which they were built, where that skill has been lost over the years through modern technology. As you know, you go back in history when things were built, much more things were done by hand than they were with machines. And they're especially like plaster work and that type of thing, that's still an art and a skill that you can't replicate usually with machines. And so if the Historic Preservation Commission saw the need that certain aspects of the architecture of that building should be replicated, then it could require, not necessarily have to, could require a skilled craftsman to make that replication.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. That's all. That's my last question. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Chavis. You had a question?
Okay, yes, I do. Just to follow up on the term of the skilled craftsman, because I do know that in the city of Charleston, I don't know if they were certified, but they had to have particular people working on just the baseboards in the house and the trims in the house, because they had as you said, a particular skill. So they just couldn't go out on the street and get anybody to do it. It had to be somebody who was well trained in it. I don't know if they were listed with any particular agency, but they seem to have known, had an inner circle of people because they went from particular house to house on that historic listing, especially those that are in the tour group. Just anybody couldn't work on those houses. But they also had help in maintaining some of it. And that's what I wanted to ask about as far as skilled craftsmen for some of the designated sites or houses that are in the district. Is there a form of assistance that would be received to persons who own property that needed to have some maintenance work done to it? Because remember, we're talking about a settlement area. The incomes are not very high. And to meet a certain criteria, it may take a little bit more money to get things done.
Well, there's Joel went over those pros and cons. You got the state tax savings and federal tax savings where you can apply for a tax credit based on the cost of the rehabilitation costs. So those would be available if we're on the, if we were listed as a historic property.
And I think there's a handful of grant programs
Mm-hmm.
too that are available to assist people in preserving or maintaining places.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
But back to the example you gave me, Ms. Chavis, I think it is important, and I know that it's natural for us to think about downtown Charleston and the buildings down there. The Charleston County's Historic Preservation Ordinance is really set up a lot different.
Yeah,
The city of Charleston has a lot of history of dealing with the old structures. And
Yes.
also, our ordinance would not get into how something is built on the inside of a property. It just has to deal with the outside of the property and sort of the bigger picture. I'm thinking that, yes, there are some unique things about the settlement community architecture, for sure. But the bigger picture from my perspective, this is my own personal perspective, is the development patterns and making sure that properties are not bought up and then re-subdivided in a way that is out of character with the way it had that community had been developed over the decades up till then, because once that pattern has been lost, it's forever lost. And there's history in the way that those properties were subdivided in itself. Right?
Okay.
And the size of houses, yeah.
So that's a good segue to my next question, because you mentioned building character of the homes, and when the applicant comes back to the board, are they looking at limiting the size and also the architectural design of the structures, which also changes the character of the community as far as development goes? We at Sol Agree, we've accepted the fact that there's we can't change the process now. We can only slow it down and manage it a little bit more strictly, because the change is coming here. It's already begun to come here, but we don't want to be the dinosaurs. We don't want to be the dinosaurs in our own community, with all the LLCs beginning to develop the property now, and which is what it's going to look like. So that's why I wanted to know whether the building character of the homes and limiting the size and the architectural design will be a factor, and whether the board approves or disapproves or even questions what's being done.
Yes, we haven't had one yet, but because the Phillips Committee would be the first district that would get into that in the future if County Council approves it. But I would think the number one thing would be, if it was going up for subdivision, two main things: the lot sizes and the proposed house sizes. Those are two. Those two things, that combination of the lot size and the house size is what's going to dictate to the Historic Preservation Commission whether or not the proposal could receive a certificate of historic appropriateness, because then they can start addressing things like the scale of buildings, the character of the buildings, the character of the subdivision versus the character of the existing community. And it would be quite obvious, I think, to the commission, in certain instances, depending on what's submitted, whether or not it's in that, it meets that criteria.
Okay. The other thing, this is my final question, because you had mentioned insurance on there, and how does this affect our area with flood zoning or the requirement of insurance on properties, especially older properties that are not required by banks, or they're not in debt to banks. So once you get a loan, they require you to insure, and a lot of the older properties over here don't have a mortgage anymore. So being in the district will be a requirement to become insured?
No, there
Flood or
wouldn't be,
otherwise?
there wouldn't be any specific flood insurance requirements associated with being in the historic district. That would just be on, case by case basis for your own, for each individual's property.
Uh-huh. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
You're
Do
welcome.
we have anyone else?
Yes, Anna, I have a question. This is Brenda.
Okay.
Does the same requirements applies to historic cemeteries in an unincorporated area too?
Yes, it would if the cemetery is on the National Register of Historic Places, or if the cemetery, if it's not on the National Register, went through the process of becoming a property of historic significance through that process that I described earlier, in which it would go to County Council for approval. So the short answer is yes, if you're on one of those lists. Yeah.
So does anyone have that information for the National Register that can be sent to me by email?
Well, we can do that, but we can make it even simpler for you. If you have a specific cemetery or cemeteries in mind, we can look them up for you. We just need the address or the parcel ID number. I don't know if you're interested in cemeteries in general and you'd want to know about that, or if you have a specific one in mind that we can tell you whether or not it's on the National Register.
No, it's a specific, I'm sorry, it's a specific one that I have in mind. It's not used anymore, but it's owned by our church, and it's actually.
Where is it? Ms. Mitchell, where is it? Yeah.
It's actually adjacent to the Charleston County property on Highway 17, off of Highway 17.
Oh, on 17th.
Yeah.
Are you talking about
Oh,
the
it's way
Shepherd?
up.
The Shepherd track?
No,
Yeah, it's adjacent to the Shepherd Tract. It's in that area.
okay. We will look, I think now that we have an area, I actually think that it might be simple for us to find out if it's on the National Register. So your church owns it, Ms. Mitchell?
Yes, uh-huh.
All right. What's the name of your church?
The church is Greater St. Mark AME Church.
All right. That'll help us look up the property. That's what I was asking. We'll look that up for you and let you know. Yeah.
Okay, because we have two cemeteries, and that one is King, but it is adjacent to the Shepherd Tract property that the county owns. And
Okay.
it's not used anymore. It hasn't been used in years,
Right.
decades. So
let me ask you this. If we find out that it's not on the National Register of Historic Places and Protected, would the church be interested in designating it as historic
On the county.
with the county?
I'm
Okay.
sure they would. I would have to have that conversation with them because I know we've been wanting to get it cleaned up, and we were told a long time ago you have to go through a specific process to clean it up, and so I don't know.
Well, okay, so that may be true for the National Register, but as I was explaining earlier, it doesn't have to be on the National Register to be protected. That was one of the things, one of the purposes of this ordinance. A property owner or a community could come and ask to be put on the county's designated list of historic property. And although I would think the church would want to clean it up eventually, that would not be a requirement of the county for us to process an application to be protected.
Oh, okay.
So, yes. So, yeah, if it's not on the National Register, there are other options, and that's one of the reasons why we have this ordinance.
Okay,
So on the slides that he went through that are what makes something historic, these are the approval criteria that an applicant would respond to. You could respond to just one or several of them, depending on what you're looking at deeming historic. So if an applicant is able to make an argument that they meet one of these criteria, then that would be enough for the application process. So when we look at that information, we can provide you with these criteria at that time as well.
okay, all right, thank you.
And, yeah, if you want to, let Nikki give you her number,
Yeah.
and you can contact her. And then we can walk you through the process to get this. We have a pre-application meeting, and we can walk you through the process about getting this designated.
Okay,
So,
all
Nikki, you
right.
want to, yeah.
Do you have a PIN?
Yes, I do.
Okay, my number is 843
Uh-huh,
202
okay,
7203.
okay. You said your name, I'm sorry.
It's Nikki Grimble.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I do have some of this information at home, but unfortunately, I'm not at home today.
Sure,
So,
yeah, give me a call. We'll talk it through it all.
okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
all right. I'd like to say something here about the cemeteries too. A lot of times we find that cemeteries are not identified in some communities, the older cemeteries. And so if it's put on the historic registry, that really gives a good way to protect that, identify and protect the cemetery. So maybe some others may know of some cemeteries that seems to be abandoned. And when it's in a condition like that, sometimes when a person may make a purchase with the cemetery on the property unknowingly, then it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, so to speak. But if we
Yes.
could have people to identify, that would really help us to protect all of the cemeteries.
Okay.
Now, I didn't hear that there was a fee. Is there a processing fee? Or are we going to get to that later?
The fee for any application is $25.
Okay.
That's the cheapest fee we have,
That's right.
just so you'll know.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Okay.
We want to see applications for these things, so we try to make it as painless as possible.
Okay.
Okay. And in reference to the community or subdivisions, where we talked about, protecting a large area like that. Here again, I think it's good for us to look into doing that, because in the older communities, if we want to protect those communities, that's the best way to do that, because if someone wants to make a change, then they would have to go through that extra process to get permission to do what it is that they are looking to change. I think that's something else that maybe some communities might want to look at. And thank you all for the history assistance that you gave for W. Gresham Maggott with the preservation of that site on Grimmel Road. I know that was a very good project for the community, and I wish someday to see the whole community might be a district that's preserved. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Is there
Okay.
more of the presentation?
We do have shall agree.
I don't know if there's anything
Do I want to do it?
if you want to.
I
You can
mean-
offer it to her.
Yeah. So, but the next part of the presentation, actually, which will probably interest some of the people I see on the on the call, Ms. Chavis and Ms. Johnson and Ms. Cromwell. Next part of the presentation, we did want to go over the Solid Green Community Overlay District that we have, and also talk about the recent historic district designation for the Mosquito Beach area. So I'll actually let Nikki do this part of it.
Okay.
Okay, Nikki? Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a really unique community where, you know, they definitely knew what they did and did not want, and they took the steps to ensure that they had special zoning that was created, you know, specifically with their community in mind, with the planning department a couple of years ago. But since then, there have been a couple of there is a historic district and a historic site designated in this area. So there's kind of a twofold layers of protection in the Solid Green community. So for any of you that don't know, Solid Green is historically an African-American community that was settled post-Reconstruction era. And the land out there is really uniquely subdivided into really long, skinny lots for farms with access to both waterways. And there's one main road, which is Solid Green Road. It was designated during that survey process in 2016 as eligible for a national register. So like Joel was talking about, if something has been deemed eligible, then that kind of takes away one hurdle. You're one step closer to having an easy time having it listed as a national register site or district. And then Mosquito Beach District was listed on the National Register in 2019 and has also received some grant funding to assist them in rehabilitation. So these are kind of two sides of the coin, but kind of seeing everything come together. Throughout the 20th century, the community thrived and it had successful small businesses such as Backman Seafood and Mosquito Beach. As the zoning regulations in the county evolved, many of the commercial businesses became what we call legal non-conforming. So they remained able to, you know, operate as they were, but if they were to ever close down, they may not be able to open the same exact business. And then also modern day subdivision regulations really inhibited any subdivision at all because of the unique composition of those long, skinny lots out in this area. And so, like I said earlier, many of the citizens had a lot of concerns about land use issues and things that they were seeing affecting their community. So they got with county council, and council directed staff to work with the community to really go through and identify what was important to them, and then come up with a community plan, and the end result was the overlay zoning district. And this is a picture of the community plan. We'd be happy to provide this to anybody interested. So the Solid Green Community Overlay Zoning District, it implements the planning and zoning strategies of the actual community plan. It was presented to the community in 2017, and it addresses the primary community needs and issues by establishing flexible subdivision options for these unique narrow lots in the area, allowing for the redevelopment of properties that were historically used as commercial properties in the Mosquito Beach and Backman Seafood locations. And then it also relaxed some standards that you would see in other zoning districts regarding home occupations and accessory dwelling units. So the zoning regulations in this area are not necessarily as strict as they may be in some other areas, because that's what the community found that they needed at that time. So this historic resource survey update that you see over on the left-hand side, that's a really great document that we seem to refer back to pretty frequently. It gives us a list of all of the settlement communities that the consultant identified. So it gives us kind of a foundation to begin our research on different districts or potential districts or sites in the area. And this was the final map. So you see the tan colored properties remain residential, and then there's just a little handful of red properties that would allow commercial uses. And the commercial uses, again, were specifically formed just by what the historic uses were of these sites. So you can't just have just anything. It still is very specific to the context of this area. So designating the commercial areas. The community stated that they wanted to see the former commercial properties had the opportunity to redevelop, and but they didn't want to see a whole lot of new uses brought into the area. So they identified at that time Mosquito Beach, Backman seafood locations, the Seashore Lodge, and the vacant snack and convenience stores on Soligree Road. So those are the ones that were identified as the red properties. So after a few years, the lasting effects of this community plan and you know, the community working with staff to really identify what they wanted and what they wanted to see for the future of Soligree, it evolved to having Mosquito Beach designated as a historic district in 2019. With that designation, they were able to apply for some grant funding to assist in rehabilitating the buildings and bringing life back to the commercial district, which I think is really cool. In the permitting process, the applicants for the first phase of rehabilitation, they had to go before the Historic Preservation Commission and get that first certificate of historic appropriateness. And they had to be compliant with the zoning regulations established in Soligree. So it was, you know, a few extra steps of work, and they had to take a little bit longer to get through these processes. But because they were in place, it has established the continual vision and preservation that the community really wanted to see out there for future generations to enjoy. And that's all I've got for that.
Yeah, so Soligree, that project for that overlay started before we had a Historic Preservation Commission. But we think that the efforts of the overlay resulted in the same type of protection, maybe a little bit different, but protections that if it was a historic district. And then, you know, I'm just describing these things so that you can understand sort of the distinctions of the overlays and the historic districts that we hope to see soon. Also, too, the Mosquito Beach, Mr. Wilder, he had the option to either get on the National Register of Historic Places for protection, or could have gone through just the Historic Preservation Commission for designation as historic. He chose the National Register of Historic Places, which is fine, because by virtue of it being on the National Register, then it falls under this protection that the ordinance has. If you remember, I was describing there's two ways to become protected. It's you're either on the National Register or you're on this local list, which the local list includes anything that's on the National Register as well, but not just that. Yeah. All right.
Do we have any questions from anyone or comments?
I was trying to, Anna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, excuse me. I just wanted to add into that. This is Suzanne Chavez, as the president of my community. I've been working with planning and staff, Mr. Evans and staff and our council member. It was a fantastic experience for our community in learning more, because it enlightened us to so many different things that we were allowed to do in our community and to put up some safeguards. this plan has, this comprehensive development plan or overlay plan has helped us with. One of the things that we recognize is that in our community, we had to look at the character design of our community by nature itself, and that was being an island in itself, with a river on the front and a river on the back. But that as people began to buy out more property on the what we call the front end of Solid Green, which is on the Solid Green River or the Folly River, they would come in and want to put up big fences, which would block the view of the people living on the other side of the street. And that was a part of the beauty of it all, sitting on your porch and being able to take in the cool breeze and look at the river tide going in and out. That's a big part of the beauty of our community. So we had to look at that and put clauses in there to limit the size of the fences that would obstruct the view from the people on the other side of the street. And another project that we're working on now is not to have too many docks on the Holland Creek side of the river. That's in process right now. But with this plan, also, we were able to add in a new zoning because of the size of the lot, the duplexes, add in to allow certain types of duplexes and limit the distance from the main road. So we were able to, I guess, in a sense, to hand carve this plan based upon what the community wanted and to try to save as much of our character as possible. Planning did a fantastic job and a very patient, time-consuming work with us to get this done. And you know, some of the people in the community still talk about that experience and what they learned from that. So it is something I recommend, and I am out there recommending to people that you get with planning and set up your comprehensive development plan so that your community can be preserved in the best way possible, and that's how you see it today and further down the road into the future, and help to protect the character of your community. So it is a great experience, a great learning opportunity, and it is a great opportunity to build for the future, how you want your community to look. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. So I do have a question, Mr. Evans. The plan we did for Parker's Ferry.
Oh, yeah.
That is considered a community plan as well.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am.
Now, but then they haven't, but so they should be able to apply for the historic preservation if they so desired. Because we've done quite a bit of that work already with them.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing that they could benefit from the work that we've done, mostly it was uses, of course, most overlays are, since those uses are, since overlay districts are a planning tool for uses, but there's also some development standards in there. But the biggest thing that the communities that have a community plan is a designated boundary that's been identified in our comprehensive plan. So the community could use that boundary as a starting point to figure out which part of it they want, or all of it, that they want to be considered designated as historic. They can use that map and get the 51% of the registered voters and make an application.
Okay. And also, I know I participated with some projects for the Center for Heirs Property, historical, identifying historical communities. And here again, I know that there are several projects in my district that participated, several communities that participated with those projects, whether it was for cemeteries or for signs. And so just want to remind the viewers that those are also some projects that they might be able to put something together to identify as a historical area.
May I ask a
Okay.
question, please?
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Davis? More of a comment too, because of Parker's Ferry, because we were competing with them a little bit to become the template for for the plan. But anyway, I was most particularly interested in and applauded them at how they carved out their commercial nodes. I know that that might not be considered historic, but a couple of those businesses were there for a good long time. And we in turn did the same thing in carving out our commercial nodes where we want commercial businesses to be. And I just thought it was beautiful the way that Parker's Ferries, theirs were identified, and then they went back in also with planning and set the number of, I guess, like you said, a working plan, a number of business transactions or vehicles and all that stuff was all put in there to preserve the community so you wouldn't have a high volume of traffic coming to the area, but the landowner, the business, the commercial use was still there and developed right along with the community. I thought that was ideal.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Evans, they did identify their boundaries and all of that.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, so it should be not so hard for them to go through this process if they decide to identify as a historical area.
Right, they've got a good starting point. So it's now up to the majority of those property owners in that boundary as whether or not they want to give consent to do it.
Right. Okay. Do we have anyone else that like to make a comment or ask a question? No. Okay. And so is your presentation complete, Mr. Evans? Everybody?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, we're done on our end. So.
Oh, well, timing is, are you right on time? 1:32. Ms. Hess?
Yep.
What is our next, we don't have our topic for the next month yet?
No, we had talked about possibly doing some greenbelt stuff so we could talk about. The next meeting is going to be on March 28th. I'm sorry, April 28th. And then also just as a reminder, I know I said it all out, but tomorrow at Baxter Patrick, they are doing a single dose of Johnson & Johnson vaccine from 1 until 5, or I'm sorry, 1 to 4. But do not get there before 12:30. So if anybody still is needing to get a vaccine, there will be a vaccine clinic at Baxter Patrick tomorrow from 1 to 4. And don't get there before 12:30. I think that's all I have, Ms. Johnson. All
right, well, thank you so much. And it looks like we have completed our meeting within the time period 1:33. So I want to thank all of the participants here today, and hopefully you've learned more about the preservation program that we have at Charleston County, and you'll take advantage of some of those things that were suggested. So until next time, I want to bid you a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you, planning, Joel and planning.
And thank you to the planning staff.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Yep. Don't forget that. Don't ever leave without that.
Yes, indeed. I don't see y'all. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you all.
Bye.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
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 Uh-oh, that might be mine.
That's it?